Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Aceves, and this is another episode of mindfitpodcast. And I'm here with Neil Babins. How you doing, Neil?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing really good. A little bit tired because I had a long night making my video for YouTube, but I'm still here, which is good. How was your weekend?
Weekend was really nice. I was up in the country, up in the mountains in Wrightwood near Mountain High Ski Resort. Of course, the resort's closed, but got a cabin up there, and it was very peaceful. Very small little town, really nice. I've never been, so very relaxing. And me too. I've had a draining week. It's only Thursday morning now for us, but it's just really, it's been a long week, and I slept last night, but still feels like I didn't, So. Yeah, there's pre-coffee and post-coffee, and I'm still in the middle somewhere. So, yeah, but I'm doing all
Nice.
right. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about conforming and things that we do in our society to conform to be obedient, right? And this is one of my favorite subjects from social psychology. And I remember when I was in school, one of the books that we had to read was The Social Animal. I don't know if you ever read that book.
I don't think I did. No.
Yeah,
No.
it was really really good. It has basically it's a compilation of a lot of studies that've been done, and one of them, it was one of the most famous ones, is where they put people in a room and they show them, they take three people, I think, and they show them some lines on the board, and one of them is different than the other ones, but in part of the tree, I think it's three or five people, but one of those people is not it's a part of the study, and the other ones are people that come in that are already a part of the researchers. And so the study is to see if the person would conform to seeing the line as all the other lines. So
Hmm.
they asked him, do you remember the name of that study?
The name of who now?
Of the study? I don't know if you ever heard of it.
No. I
But
know. I don't know.
I don't remember the exact name, but basically they have to, they see the lines and they all look the same kind of, but one of them is not the same. And so all the people in the group say, "Oh yeah, they're all the same." And then
Oh, yeah.
this person
Yeah.
sees the line and then go, "Oh, because everybody's saying that they're the same." They
Right.
conform and they agree to it, even though inside they feel like maybe that's not the same. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. The peer pressure,
Right.
right, from society.
Right. I mean, it's yielding to group pressure. I'm not sure the actual name of the study, but I do know which study you're talking about. There's been many actually like that. There's
Yes, yes.
yeah, there's been quite a few. In fact, when I was going through my graduate program, one of the courses that I had to take was in developing a research project for the potential of eventually doing a PhD. And I put together, critical thinking was a very big part of my passion going through school. How people would think critically or think in group think, how people would break down information and process information to come up with conclusions that would become very either conforming to a certain group or individualistic. And I put together about four pictures. I had people who did visual design, art design four pictures for me, where it kind of looks like a jungle, very jumbled, abstract pictures, and inside the pictures were hidden within there. Those things that you see in comic books that say how many hens do you see, how many pigs do you see, how many monkeys do you see. It was exactly like that, and it wasn't so hard that you couldn't see the shapes. It wasn't so abstract like, oh, that's not a monkey. I mean, anyone could. It wasn't like that. There actually were four types of animal, and inside the pictures there were like three lambs, two hens, one turkey, and each picture would change. And I'd had different groups of people visually take a look at what the picture and say, how many of these animals do you see? And in some groups we would prompt them by saying, people have seen this many animals in this picture, see if you can find them. And in another group we'd say, how many do you see, without any prompting. And in another group we'd say, if you see more than three hens, please contact us later, as if there's a problem. with your vision or something like that. We'd put fear into people. We'd separate many different variables. And also, we'd also separate people by, at that time, we don't want to get political, by how they would tend to view what was going on in the country. This was during the Bush era, when it was religion versus science going on. So we would separate two groups based on religiosity, based on right wing, left wing, and we would see if there's a difference between how people would perceive critically what was in the picture after you've been prompted to what you're supposed to see in the picture. And we did see variations. We did see, I can't say this was a perfect research project. I was still doing my bachelor's, but on the overall, the results did show with quite significance that if people are expected to see something, they will find a way to see that. They will find a way to process the information through the jumbled information that they're receiving and the abstract information that they're receiving. And there are many variables that you have to make sure that you're isolating. Did I isolate them all? I'm sure not. My professor said, very good job, but it wasn't perfect. It was just a start, but it really got me down that track. So what the experiment that you just demonstrated, that you just talked about, is very along the lines of there's a lot of validity to it, a lot of reliability to it. It's been demonstrated over and over again that what you're expected to see based on what a group expects you to see, through persuasion, through identifying with that group, fitting in with that group, and even through criticism of other people in the group, even bullying, you will tend toward conformity based on what the group has decided to see conclusively through group pressure. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah,
I just looked it up, by the way. It's called the Ash Conformity Study. And
there you go.
Yeah. And there's
That wasn't mine.
Yeah. There's a lot of different studies that I remember from social psychology that I absolutely loved. Like the Milgram Experiment, when they used to shock people. And, the thing about, that was shocking to me is how we would conform to some authority, that figure, somebody that we considered to be, important. And that's why doctors wear, those white coats, because they suddenly become this major person to us, and, the whatever they say goes. And so the study, the Milgram Experiment, is when, they had people shock somebody else in a different room, and some of the shocks were, not real, but they were made to seem like they were actually almost killing the other person, and they wanted to see how far a person would go by following directions of somebody telling them to shock the other person. Right? Do you remember that one?
Absolutely, the Yale study. Yeah.
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 And
yeah. The Yale. Yeah.
Yeah. It was Milgram who wanted to see that, and they found that if somebody's wearing a coat, how people would follow their directions. But then they also found that if somebody was in a different room, it would be less. It would have less of an impact. Same as if somebody was on the phone, and they've done multiple variations of it. But the idea is how we follow directions by either someone who's in authority, or if we're in a group and we want to conform, we want to be accepted, then we tend to go with whatever the group says, even though the group may be wrong, or the authority figure could be telling you to do something that you don't want to do, that is going to kill someone, but because they're person of authority, then we tend to want to follow that person. And so this is human nature, and so today we wanted to talk about this because I think it's relevant to what's happening today. There's a lot of people that are not happy with the whole thing about wearing masks. Some people are really hating that. They're rejecting that. And, and some people are really wanting everyone to wear masks because they understand that there's a virus and we need to protect each other. And so I feel like there's a middle ground between both. I feel like sometimes you don't need to wear a mask. If you're alone in the forest and there's no one around you, then it's okay not to wear a mask. But then some people take it to the extreme where they do that, and I also feel like sometimes we do need to wear a mask if we're around a lot of people to protect them, and we need to keep that social distancing and all those different things. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like you said earlier, we have to use critical thinking to make sure that we're not falling into any of these traps.
Yeah, and the issue is that there's so many shades of gray out there, so much different information that I've said. One of my theories is that it's along a spectrum because you can build a case, or people can build a case. Any group with conformity can build a case for any kind of approach or conclusion about what's going on in our society right now. And because we look out the window and we could take physical evidence and attach that to group pressure, any group that we choose, wherever we happen to be living, or whatever group we happen to identify with the most, and we can come up with any conclusion, any belief system around what's going on right now. There's enough abstract out there and conflicting information that people don't know, and in my opinion, that's creating more anxiety than the actual pandemic itself, because people don't know who to believe or what to believe, and they drift toward a certain group in terms of groupthink. And what you were talking about with Milgram, by the way, there's a great movie called Experimenter that came out in 2015, and it's directed by Michael Amareda, and it's
Never
by
heard of it.
Magnolia Pictures. Yeah, I was on Netflix, I believe, several years ago. That's where I saw it, and I think
Cool.
Winona Ryder is actually in it. Milgram was talking about obedience to authority. He was talking about conformity through pressure to conform through authority figures, people telling you, don't worry, we're taking responsibility for what's going on behind the glass. If the guy is screaming and you're increasing the shock level and you don't want to shock him because, a lot of people said, I want to stop. I don't want to do this anymore. The guy's dying back there. He's screaming in pain. He's asking me to stop. And the experimenter would wear a white lab coat, first of all, to represent an authority figure, and sit there writing notes on a clipboard, looking very official, saying, don't worry, we have everything under control. We take full responsibility for what's going on behind the glass. Don't worry about it. You have to continue the experiment. That's part of the to get to the conclusion that we are looking for, we've got to continue with the experiment. And they wanted to see through obedience to authority if people would conclusively go all the way to the end. I think it was 400 volts or 450 volts was the top shock. And by that time, the actor who was behind the glass wasn't even making any noise anymore, indicating that he probably died or passed out. But I think it was like 75%, more than 2/3, or 75% or 80% went all the way to the end, 450 volts, no matter who they were, no matter what walk of life they came from, no matter what their political beliefs were, no matter what their racial view was, nothing made any difference. No, all across, women, men, and what they were trying to examine was how Germans became Nazis during the Holocaust, during the Second World War, and obediently did everything that they did, from the concentration camps to being willful executioners, and how an entire society, not an entire society, shouldn't say that, but enough of an entire society fell behind mass murder, and how people could be could conform through authority figures. And Stanley Milgram found, like, hey, it's not one group or the other. We're all capable of this through group pressure and through obedience to authority. And then this guy, Janes, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, a psychologist, did it, and just like the old the other experiment that you brought up. He put beans into a jar, and then he had a group discussing how many beans they thought was in the jar, kind of like a jury. And then he would separate the group and have them come back individually later on, and then interview them and say, would they like to change the estimate that the group came up with as to how many beans are in the jar? And vast majority, like 95% or something like that, stuck with the group estimate, even if individually they may have had, and because later on they were interviewed and said, did you actually think maybe there weren't 30 in the jar, there were maybe 40 or 50? And some people said, I kind of thought there were more or less, but I kind of went with the group answer. So that shows that there is a certain compliance to authority after groups rendered a certain decision. And it's
Definitely.
it's by double pressure from what you're observing, response to real events, or imagined, involving the pressure of social norms or expectations of a group. we tend to conform to what we think we see. And it breaks down critical thinking because we want to be liked, we want to be appreciated, we want to be respected, we want to belong, we want to identify, we want to fit in. And through persuasion, through criticism, through witch hunting, through shaming, bullying, all kinds of persuasion, we can get people to drift more toward the group pressure. Because if you even look at what's going on right now in our country, last thing I'll say is that depending upon where there's, quote, spikes, people have a certain group pressure to conform. They don't always conform, but they have a pressure to conform to a certain belief about what to do and how to do it. Whereas if you go to other places where there's not that spike, there's a different group conformity. Now, I'm not saying what's right and what's wrong. I'm simply saying there's a group conformity based on the group that surrounds you. That's all my point is about that. So, so there's,
and it's really easy to fall into this trap. And if you think back of in Hitler time, the Nazis, they were very into their beliefs, and anybody that would think differently or would try to think critically, Hitler would kill them. And so it was a matter of survival at that time. And so my point is that it's really easy to fall into this trap of conforming and to follow the masses. And sometimes it is necessary to keep people under control and to do certain things, but at the same time I feel like we need to still be human, and be considerate of what's happening and try to think for the betterment of humanity, right? And so for example, this whole thing about our lifestyle, the way we live and the way we eat. For example, we go to a restaurant and fast food place and we create a bunch of trash in just a couple of minutes, and that's the norm, and we feel like that's fine, and before we know it, we've created tons and tons of trash every year, and this trash is it's not disappearing because plastic doesn't go away. We don't see it, but because it doesn't it's not in front of us, then doesn't mean it's not affecting us. So there's a lot of things that are out there that we need to understand and think critically to change our lives, to change our lifestyles, to be more welcoming to this planet, and to understand that this planet is really our home. And so I feel like that's really something that we all need to consider. Lately I've been watching a lot of shows and a lot of things that have been talking about this because I feel like it's an important subject. And now with the whole pandemic, I think it's a good time to reconsider how we do things. No?
Absolutely. And one reference I looked up was experiment by Deutsch and Girard in 1955. Well, that's when they were paired. Identified two reasons why people tend to conform. They split it up into two groups: normative conformity and informational conformity. Normative conformity by Deutsch and Girard is yielding to group pressure because a person wants to fit in with the group. And that's actually he references the Ash-Line study that you talked about. And then the other point is conforming because the person is scared of being rejected by the group. So, for example, if I listen to clients all day, and I talk with them all day, and 75% of what gets brought up, take a guess, is of course what's going on around us, the pandemic and all its effects on people, so which cannot be minimized. So a lot of people will express their view of what's going on, but I hear such different views from one client to another. One client will say, that they're tired of it. Another client will say that they're scared of it. So they conform because they're scared of being rejected. And as a therapist, I don't share my personal view through boundaries. But if I was to share my personal view and I would become afraid of being rejected by my client, of course I wouldn't do that during a session. But even with friends, if people are sitting around in a jacuzzi, talking about it, you might want to fit in with the group and not say, I disagree with you all. I think you're all this, you might not do that. You might stay quiet, or you might express yourself, but you don't want to be rejected by somebody. So you tend to conform, nod your head and agree or pretend to agree, and then end up probably agreeing. And the last form of normative conformity is this type of conformity usually involves compliance, where a person publicly accepts the views of a group but privately rejects them. And that's going on a lot as well. I mean, that's exactly what I meant when talking to clients. I might listen to somebody say something. Now, whether I agree with them or not is not the point of therapy, but but in my personal life as well, I often find myself privately disagreeing vehemently with what a group is saying,
Mm-hmm.
whatever group it may be, but just nodding my head and going, I got it, yeah, and trying to find a way to find something about what they're saying that I agree with, so I can continue the conversation. Because sometimes I find the atmosphere out there today is such that if I say something contrary to some person's groupthink conformity, I could lose that friendship. I could literally be shunned and spend the rest of the weekend not talking to anybody at the campsite or whatever it is, and I don't want that. So,
Mm-hmm.
And then there's informational conformity. This usually occurs when a person lacks knowledge and looks to the group for guidance, or when a person is in an ambiguous, i.e. unclear situation and socially compares their behavior with the group. And there's this reference to a guy named Sheriff's study. Sheriff is Sheirif. And this type of conformity usually involves internalization, where a person accepts the views of the groups and adopts them as an individual. So your individual view becomes what the group conclusion was. So yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the takeaway from today, I would say, is to, notice how things are going around you, and, not to allow yourself to conform, but to see and think clearly, to see if what you're doing is going to help or not, in your life, and if what they're doing is right or wrong. Because I feel like there's so much out there right now. I feel like a lot of people are actually, getting their heads, filled with ideas that are not real. There's so many conspiracy theories right now. YouTube, my mom, she has all these things that she tells me every time I see her, and she tells me, oh, have you seen this or I've seen that? And she thinks that, with the COVID-19 vaccine, they're going to put a chip in our heads and they're going to start controlling us. And so she refuses to get the vaccine. And there's just so many things out there that I've heard lately. And it's so much harder to show people the truth, because, like you said, groupthink, everyone, there's so many more people now believing all these stories that they're becoming more real. The whole 5G thing, people thought the 5G is what started this whole COVID-19 thing. And so there's a lot of things happening. And I think it's important to keep, our minds straight and to think for ourselves. I don't know what you think about that.
I think that something else that gets brought up a lot, we brought this up before, I think, in a separate podcast, but the concept of anxiety, of rumination, of overthinking, talking about groupthink, when you think about 5G caused COVID, or, misinformation coming at you, and, this fear and that fear, and it gets compounded. Some anxiety, which is what that creates or what that embodies, is usually a distraction, a diversion from what's actually going on inside of you. So if you start to worry about, conspiracies and whatnot in an exaggerated form, it's usually an indicator that something else is going on with you at the core level, emotionally at the core level. And your mind is purposely taking you away from that and housing it somewhere else with either misinformation or pseudo information, or, it could be fake news or real news. It could even be something real. Even if it's something true and valid, you're still exaggerating it in your mind, and your mind is taking you away from the here and now. It's taking you away from being present. It's taking you away from something more core. Because if you think about it, what's fundamentally at the base of all of this is fear. If they could find a way to make you afraid of something, afraid of hurting yourself, of hurting somebody else, afraid of being rejected by groups, right? Afraid of being shunned, afraid of being ostracized, afraid of being looked at poorly, or perhaps even more so. They'll often say, if you don't conform, you're going to get dinged, you're going to get taxed, or you're going to get thrown in prison, or you're going to get your license taken away, or it's always about fear to conform, fear to conform. It's not because we really agree. And you see this across the board. You'll see it in every occupation. They'll have a board of ethics, and they'll say, if you don't do this, we'll take your license away. And that doesn't mean that what they're saying is valid for everybody, but they're saying, it's out of fear. if you don't pay your credit card bill, which you should pay your credit card bill, but if you don't pay your credit card bill, we're going to, come after you with collections. It's like there's always a consequence that involves fear. So fear is at the base of all of it. And your core emotion, when you start going away in your mind, when you start overthinking a situation, it's, check in with yourself, do some mindfulness, meditation. And I know you're good at that, Robert, all that, all that's grounding yourself, and check in, and you'll probably find that what's at the base of it is fear. If they could make people afraid, they could make people conform. So just, yeah.
So watch yourselves and,
Yep.
and be mindful of what you're feeling and why you're doing what you're doing, and try to, I always say meditate, because I feel like we can, get in touch with ourselves and really go from that point, because, right now we need it more than ever. If anyone wants to go to my YouTube channel, just look up Robert Aceves. I have multiple meditations now on there that are very helpful, that can help you to, be more mindful of yourself and connect with yourself and be strong with your own, mindset, and be assertive and really follow your path and your dreams. As long as you're not harming anyone, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I do agree with you, though. Fear is a big thing, and it can really harm us in multiple ways. So, any last words before we end, Neil, today?
Well, no, I like what you said. Just check in with yourself, and watch your level of fear. And even on social media, you'll notice a lot of, well, we always notice that in social media. Watch the witch hunts, watch the self-righteousness, watch blaming other people for not conforming to what you think they ought to do. At the base of it is fear. People are afraid that others will cause danger and risk to others, yes, but I think people are also afraid of being wrong. If other people are doing it in a different way, the fear is that maybe they have a point, So fear is often double-edged. In fact, it's more than double-edged, it's multiple-edged. But check in with your fear. What do you fear? Because all judgment comes from fear. All judgment comes from some sort of fear. So check in with your core emotion, especially right now. And when we talk about self-care, which we've talked about before, self-care is also subjective. So just watch the witch hunt, because that's dividing people even more now, and it's creating more stress and anxiety and more depression than the actual pandemic itself. So
exactly. So I totally agree with you, and hopefully this podcast was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please send them our way. We would love to hear what you have to say when you think about this. I know there's a lot of different thinking when it comes to all this stuff we talked about. So please, share your thoughts, and we'll continue to do this podcast whenever we can. Remember, we're here every Tuesday at 6 p.m. If you have any questions, concerns, or things that you would like us to talk about, then send them our way as well. And thank you to all the people that are following us every week now. We really appreciate you. Also, the people that are donating, thank you. And hope to see you next week. Thanks, Neil.
All right, thank you. We'll see you next week.
All right, bye. This podcast is brought to you by MindFit. Please help us to share this podcast with your friends and family to grow this community. And if you'd like to donate to this podcast, or if you'd like to share your comments, questions, or concerns, send them to mindfitpodcast@gmail.com, or you can call us directly at 714-328-4661.